The wind off the mountains didn't care that Raina Holloway was tired. It screamed through the gaps in the barn walls the same way it had for 23 months, ever since the day Thomas rode out into that early storm and never came back. The same wind that killed him now wanted to finish what it started. Raina could feel it testing the cabin's roof every night, probing for weakness, searching for the crack that would finally bring everything down. She swung the axe again. Her hands were wrapped in strips of old flour sack, but blood still seeped through where the blisters had burst yesterday. The wood split with a sound like breaking bone. She added it to the pile that would maybe last until December, if she was careful. If the temperature didn't drop early. If the wolves stayed away from what was left of the livestock. If. The word that ruled her entire existence now. You're killing yourself out here, Raina. She didn't turn around. She knew that voice. Margaret Chen from the general store, probably bringing another casserole wrapped in pity and judgment in equal measure. Brought you some cornbread. Margaret's boots crunched through the frost. And before you get all proud on me, it's not charity. I made too much. Bill can't eat cornbread anymore on account of his stomach. Raina set the axe down, not because she wanted to stop, but because her arms were shaking. Thank you. You look like hell. I look like someone who's been chopping wood since sunrise. Margaret was quiet for a moment, studying the property the way people did now, taking inventory of everything that was falling apart. The leaning fence posts, the barn door hanging crooked on one hinge, the empty chicken coop where predators had gotten in last month and killed everything. There's still time, you know, Margaret said softly. Time for what? To sell. Move into town. There's a boarding house on 3rd Street that... No. Raina, I said no. Raina picked up the axe again, even though her palms were screaming. Thomas built this place. I'm not abandoning it because things got hard. Hard? Margaret's voice cracked. Honey, hard was 2 years ago. This is suicide. You're out here alone with winter coming and no money and no help, and every predator in Montana knows it. Last week, Samuel Garrett said he saw wolf tracks right up to your porch. Samuel Garrett should mind his own business. He's worried. We're all worried. Then stop worrying and let me work. The axe came down. Another piece of wood split. Another few hours of heat. Another small victory against the cold that wanted to swallow her whole. Margaret sighed. You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met. You say that like it's a bad thing. It is when it gets you killed. Margaret set the cornbread down on a tree stump. At least come to the church social Saturday. You can't live like a hermit forever. I don't have time for socials. You don't have time to be human anymore? Is that what Thomas would have wanted? Raina's jaw clenched. Using Thomas's name like that was a low blow, and Margaret knew it. Thomas isn't here to want anything. No, he's not. But you are. And hiding out here chopping wood until your hands fall off isn't going to bring him back. The older woman waited, hoping for something. An apology, a breakdown, some crack in the armor Raina had built around herself. When nothing came, Margaret just shook her head and walked back to her wagon. Raina waited until the sound of wheels faded before she let the axe slip from her hands. Her palms were on fire. Every muscle in her back screamed. She'd been up since 4 in the morning and hadn't eaten anything except weak coffee and the heel of yesterday's bread. Margaret was right about one thing. She did look like hell. She felt like it too. But she was still standing. That had to count for something. The wolves came back that night. Raina heard them before she saw them, that low howling that made something primitive in her chest want to curl up and hide. She grabbed Thomas's rifle from above the door and stepped out onto the porch, her breath fogging in the freezing air. 4 sets of eyes reflected the moonlight from the tree line, watching, calculating. Get out of here! She fired a shot into the air. The crack echoed off the mountains and the eyes disappeared, but she knew they'd be back. They always came back. Inside, the cabin was cold despite the fire. She added another log, one of the pieces she'd split today, and watched the flames catch. The heat felt good for about 3 seconds before the reality set in. That was one more piece of wood she didn't have anymore. 1 less hour of warmth. The math was brutal, and it never added up in her favor. She ate Margaret's cornbread standing at the window, watching the dark spaces between the trees where the wolves had been. It was good cornbread. She hated how good it was. It reminded her that she used to be the kind of person who baked things and invited people over and laughed at dinner parties. Now she was the kind of person who ate alone in the dark with a loaded rifle on the table. The letter was still where she'd left it that morning, pinned under the sugar bowl. She'd read it so many times the creases were starting to tear. 3 months. That's how long the bank was giving her to come up with $400, or they'd foreclose on everything. $400 might as well have been $4,000. $4 million. She had $18 left. Most of that would go to flour and lamp oil before the month was out. Raina folded the letter and shoved it in the stove, watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash. It didn't solve anything, but it felt good to destroy something on purpose instead of watching everything slowly fall apart. The wolves howled again, closer this time. She grabbed the rifle and went back to the porch. This time, there were more than 4. Hutas. By Friday, word had gotten around town that Raina Holloway was officially crazy. She heard it in the way conversations stopped when she walked into the general store. Saw it in how people looked at her, that mixture of pity and fascination people reserve for watching something break in slow motion. "I heard she sleeps with that rifle," someone whispered near the pickle barrel. "Well, can you blame her? Out there all alone? Alone because she's too stubborn to accept help. Or too proud." Raina kept her head down and bought what she could afford. Flour, coffee, a small box of matches because she was down to her last 3. The total came to $7.60. The clerk, a nervous boy named Peter, counted her money twice. "Mrs. Holloway, there's only $6 here." "I know, put the matches back." "But you need—" "I said put them back." She walked out with her small bag of supplies and the weight of every eye in the store on her back. Outside, the October sky was the color of old iron. Snow was coming. She could smell it on the wind, that particular sharpness that meant winter was done being polite and was about to show its teeth. The ride back to the homestead took 3 hours on her aging mare, Della. The horse was getting thin, too. They were all getting thin. Raina tried not to think about what would happen when the feed ran out. She was a mile from home when she saw the rider. He was just sitting there on a massive black horse, right in the middle of the trail like he owned it. Big wasn't the right word for him. He was built like something that had been carved from the mountains themselves. Broad-shouldered, solid, the kind of presence that seemed to warp the space around him. Raina's hand went to the rifle on her saddle. "Easy," the man said. His voice was surprisingly quiet for someone his size. "Not here to cause trouble." "Then get off my property." "This is the main trail." "The trail that runs through my property." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "You're Raina Holloway." It wasn't a question. She didn't like that he knew her name. Didn't like the way he was looking at her. Not with the pity she'd gotten used to, but with something else. Assessment, maybe. Like he was trying to figure out if she was worth whatever thought had brought him out here. "Who's asking?" Gideon Vale. The name hit her like cold water. Everyone in Montana Territory knew about Gideon Vale. The man who'd survived a blizzard that killed 6 other men. Who'd built a ranch in the high country where nothing should be able to survive. Who'd broken the ribs of a man in a bar fight 3 years ago just for looking at him wrong. He was legend. Myth. The kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. And he was sitting on her trail watching her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "I know what you're going to say," Raina said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "And the answer is no. I'm not selling. I don't care what you're offering. I'm not here to buy your land. Then what do you want?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. She'd learned the hard way that looking away was the same as giving up. "I want to marry you," he said. Raina blinked. "What?" "Before the first snow. We do this right, legal, proper. By spring, you'll have a family and a future worth fighting for." For a second, she thought she'd misheard him, or maybe she'd finally snapped. Maybe the isolation and exhaustion had finally broken something in her brain, and she was hallucinating conversations with mountain men who proposed marriage like they were discussing the weather. "You're insane," she said flatly. "Maybe. You don't even know me." "I know enough." "Like what?" "I know you've been alone for 2 years. I know the bank's about to take everything. I know you're splitting wood with bleeding hands because you're too stubborn to quit. I know every person in town is taking bets on when you'll finally break." He leaned forward slightly in his saddle. And I know you haven't broken yet. The words should have felt intrusive. They should have made her angry. Instead, they just made her tired. And that makes you want to marry me? My stubbornness? That makes me think we might survive together better than apart. This is the most ridiculous conversation I've ever had. Probably. He straightened up, gathering his reins. Think about it. You've got until first snow. After that, the offer's gone. I'm not thinking about anything. I don't need a husband. I need a kiik. Money, security. Someone to help fix that barn before it collapses. Someone to hunt enough meat to get you through winter. Someone to stand on that porch with you when the wolves come back. Raina's breath caught. How did you... I rode past your place last week. Saw the tracks. You fired 3 shots around midnight. He met her eyes. That's a lot of wolves for one woman and one rifle. I managed. For now. The wind picked up, cold enough to cut through her coat. Gideon's horse shifted, steam rising from its nostrils. The big man didn't move, just kept watching her with that same steady gaze. Why me? Raina asked finally. If you want a wife, there are plenty of women in town who'd say yes in a heartbeat. I don't want them. Why not? Because they'd break. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. First hard winter, first bad year, they'd break. You won't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. There was something in his voice, not arrogance exactly, but absolute certainty. Like he'd already decided who she was, and nothing she said was going to change his mind. It should have made her angry. Instead, it just made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in 2 years. I have to go, she said, nudging Della forward. Gideon moved his horse aside to let her pass. First snow, Mrs. Holloway. After that, offer's gone. She didn't look back, didn't respond, just kept riding, her heart hammering in her chest, Margaret's bag of supplies clutched against her like armor. Behind her, she could feel Gideon Vale watching until she disappeared around the bend. That night, Raina couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind test the walls and replaying the conversation over and over. I want to marry you. Like it was simple. Like marriage was a business transaction and not the thing that had once meant everything to her. Thomas had proposed on a Sunday morning after church, nervous and sweet, and stumbling over his words. They'd had 3 good years before the mountain took him. 3 years of building something together, of planning a future that would never happen now. And now a stranger wanted to offer her what? A different future? A practical arrangement with a man who probably saw her the same way he'd see a good horse, useful, sturdy, not likely to bolt at the first sign of trouble. The wolves started howling around 11. Raina grabbed the rifle and went to the window. Counted 6 sets of eyes this time. They were getting bolder. In another week, they'd be bold enough to test the door. She fired a warning shot. They scattered, but not as far as before. When she went back to bed, she lay there doing math in her head. $400 by the end of January. Even if she sold everything that wasn't nailed down, she wouldn't make half that. She could try to find work in town, but who'd hire a woman when there were men looking for jobs? No, she couldn't. There was nothing she could do. The math didn't work. It had never worked. She'd just been too stubborn to admit it. Raina pulled the quilt up over her head like she was 10 years old again, trying to hide from monsters in the dark. Except the monsters were real now. Wolves and winter and bankruptcy. Things that didn't care how hard she fought or how much she wanted to keep Thomas's dream alive. She thought about Gideon Vale's words. By spring, you'll have a family and a future worth fighting for. A family. She hadn't let herself think about that in 2 years. Hadn't let herself want anything except survival. But lying there in the dark with the wolves howling outside, she let herself imagine it for just a second. Waking up and not being alone. Having someone to split the work with. Having enough wood and enough food and enough security to sleep through the night without gripping a rifle. Having a child, maybe. Eventually. The thought terrified her more than the wolves ever could. By Saturday, Raina still hadn't made up her mind. She went to the church social because Margaret had shamed her into it, and because sitting alone in the cabin was making her feel like the walls were closing in. She wore her best dress, which wasn't saying much since it was 2 years old and had been mended so many times the seams had seams. The social was held in the church basement, packed with people and warm with body heat, and loud with the kind of cheerful noise that felt alien after months of silence. Raina stood near the punch bowl, feeling like an outsider in her own community. "Raina!" Margaret appeared with a plate of cookies. "You came! I wasn't sure you would." "You would have shown up at my cabin with more cornbread if I didn't." "Damn right I would." Margaret lowered her voice. "Listen, there's someone who wants to talk to you. Harold Finch. He's been asking about your property." "I'm not selling." "Raina—" "No," Margaret sighed. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." Raina was reaching for a cookie when the room suddenly got quieter. Not silent, but muted. Like someone had turned the volume down on every conversation at once. She looked up and felt her stomach drop. Gideon Vale stood in the doorway. He looked uncomfortable in a clean shirt and jacket, like a bear someone had tried to domesticate. His size alone would have drawn attention, but it was more than that. It was the way he moved, careful and controlled, like he was constantly aware of how much space he took up. People were staring, some with curiosity, some with fear. A few of the men looked like they wanted to puff out their chests and prove something, but none of them were stupid enough to actually try. Gideon's eyes scanned the room and landed on Raina. He walked straight toward her. "Oh, hell," Margaret whispered. "Is that—" "Yes." "What's he doing here? He never comes to these things." "How should I know?" But she did know. She knew exactly why he was here. Gideon stopped in front of her, ignoring everyone else in the room. "Mrs. Holloway? Mr. Vale? Can we talk?" "We're talking now." Privately. Every eye in the room was on them. Raina could feel the gossip being born in real time, spreading like wildfire through whispered conversations. By morning, the whole town would have theories about what Gideon Vale wanted with the stubborn widow. "Fine," she said, setting down her untouched punch. "But make it quick." They stepped outside into the cold. The sun was setting, turning the mountains purple and gold. It would have been beautiful if Raina's heart wasn't hammering so hard she could barely breathe. "You're making a scene," she said. "I know. Everyone in there is going to assume. Let them assume. Easy for you to say. You don't have to live with their gossip." "Yes, I do, just in a different way." Gideon leaned against the church wall, his hands in his pockets. "I came to see if you'd thought about what I said." "I've thought about it." "And?" Raina wrapped her arms around herself, not quite ready to say the words out loud. "It's insane." "Probably. We don't know each other. We'll learn. That's not how marriage works." "Says who?" Gideon pushed off the wall, taking a step closer. Not threatening, but present, solid. Half the marriages in this territory started as arrangements. People needed someone. They found someone. They made it work. Love came later. Or it didn't, but they survived. Survival isn't the same as happiness. No, but it's a hell of a lot better than dying alone. The words hit harder than they should have. Raina looked away, blinking hard against the sudden sting in her eyes. "That's not fair. None of this is fair." His voice gentled slightly. "I'm not offering you a fairy tale, Mrs. Holloway. I'm offering you a chance. That homestead you're killing yourself to keep? I can help you save it. The debt hanging over your head? I can pay it. The wolves outside your door every night? They won't come near my property. And what do you get out of this? A wife, a partner, someone who won't quit the first time things get hard. There are easier women. I don't want easy. I want someone who fights." Raina finally looked at him. Really looked at him. There was something in his face, not desperation exactly, but a kind of loneliness she recognized. The kind that came from being strong enough to survive anything except maybe being alone forever. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "You've been alone for years. Why decide you want a wife now?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "Because I'm tired," he said finally. "Tired of building a future for no one. Tired of watching other men have families while I have empty rooms. Tired of—" He stopped, jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. "I don't need someone to take care of me. I need someone to build something with." "And you think I'm that person?" "I know you are." "Based on what? Watching me chop wood?" "Based on the fact that you're still standing." He met her eyes. "Most people would have quit by now, moved to town, taken charity. Given up. You haven't. That means something. Inside the church, someone started playing piano. The sound drifted out through the half-open door, some cheerful hymn that felt completely disconnected from the conversation happening outside. Raina thought about the wolves, the empty barn, the bank letter she'd burned, the long winter ahead, and the certainty that she wouldn't make it through alone. She thought about Thomas and the life they'd planned, and how none of it mattered anymore because he was gone and she was here and the world didn't care about her grief. She thought about Gideon's words, a family, a future worth fighting for. I need time, she said. First snow. That's the deadline. That could be 2 weeks from now. Then you've got 2 weeks. He stepped back, giving her space. Raina wrapped her arms tighter around herself, feeling the cold seep through her dress. What happens if I say no? She asked. You say no. I leave you alone. Go find someone else. You keep fighting by yourself until you can't anymore. And if I say yes? Then we get married before the snow falls. You move to my place. We figure out the rest as we go. That's simple? Nothing's simple. But it's straightforward. Raina laughed, a short, bitter sound. You make it sound like a business deal. Maybe it is. Maybe that's smarter than pretending it's anything else. He was probably right. That's what made it so hard. He wasn't offering her romance or promises of love. He was offering her exactly what she needed: security, partnership, survival. Everything practical and nothing that could break her heart. I'll think about it, she said again. Fair enough. Gideon tipped his head slightly, the closest thing to a bow she'd probably ever get from him. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mrs. Holloway. He walked back to his horse, leaving Raina standing in the cold with her thoughts spinning and her heart doing things she didn't want to examine too closely. When she went back inside, every single person in the room pretended they hadn't been watching through the window. The first snow came on a Tuesday morning. Raina woke to that particular silence that meant the world had turned white overnight. She dressed quickly and went to the window, her breath catching at the sight. It wasn't a heavy snow, just a few inches dusting everything, turning the rough edges of her failing homestead into something almost beautiful. But beauty didn't matter. What mattered was that winter had officially arrived, and she still hadn't made up her mind. She spent the morning doing chores, moving through them mechanically while her thoughts churned. The wolves had been back twice since the social. Each time they got closer to the cabin. Each time it took more shots to scare them off. She was down to 23 bullets. By noon, she'd made her decision. She saddled Della and rode out, following the directions Margaret had given her years ago when Gideon Vale was still just a story people told. The trail up to his property was steep and winding, cutting through stands of pine that blocked out most of the light. His ranch sat in a high valley that shouldn't have existed, a sheltered bowl in the mountains with good grass and a creek that probably never froze. The cabin was bigger than she'd expected, built from logs that looked hand-hewn and sturdy. There was a barn that wasn't falling apart, fences that stood straight, smoke curling from the chimney in a way that suggested warmth and permanence. It looked like everything her homestead used to be before Thomas died and took the future with him. Gideon stepped out onto the porch before she'd even dismounted. He didn't look surprised to see her, just waited, patient and solid, while she gathered her courage. First snow came, Raina said. I noticed. Offer still good? Yes. She took a breath, let it out. Then I accept. Something shifted in his expression, not quite relief, but close. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He nodded slowly. When? You said before the first snow. Snow's here, so I guess... She swallowed hard. I guess now. Now. Unless you've changed your mind. No. He came down off the porch, moving toward her with that careful control. No, I haven't changed my mind. I just thought you'd want time to prepare. Say goodbye to people. There's nobody to say goodbye to, and if I wait, I'll lose my nerve. Gideon studied her for a long moment, and Raina forced herself not to look away. This was it. The moment where she either saved herself or made the biggest mistake of her life, and she wouldn't know which until it was too late to go back. All right, he said finally. Let's go get married. They rode back to town together, two strangers about to bind their lives together based on nothing but necessity and something neither of them could quite name. The minister was confused but willing. There were no flowers, no celebration, just a quick ceremony in his office with his wife and the clerk as witnesses. Raina wore the same mended dress she'd worn to the social. Gideon wore the same uncomfortable-looking jacket. When the minister asked if she took this man to be her husband, Raina heard Thomas's voice in her head, heard the promises they'd made to each other 3 years ago in this same church, heard herself laughing at something he'd whispered right before they'd kissed. "I do," she said, and the ghost of her first marriage shattered like ice. Gideon's "I do" was quiet but firm. They signed the papers. The minister pronounced them married. And just like that, Raina Holloway became Raina Vale, tied to a man she barely knew in a marriage built on survival instead of love. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now. "We should head back before the trail gets too bad," Gideon said. "Back to your place?" "Our place now." The words felt surreal, foreign. Raina climbed onto Della, her hands shaking slightly. Not from cold, from the weight of what she'd just done. She'd survived Thomas's death, survived 2 brutal years alone, and now she was married again, riding into the mountains with a man who was still mostly a stranger. The trail was harder to navigate in the snow. Gideon rode ahead, his big horse breaking trail while Della followed. Raina watched his back, solid, unmoving, the kind of steady presence she hadn't had in 2 years. She'd made her choice. Now she just had to live with it. When they reached the ranch, full dark was falling. Gideon helped her down from her horse without a word, his hands careful. They took care of the animals together in the barn, him showing her where everything was, her trying not to think about how strange it felt to be doing ordinary tasks beside a husband she'd acquired like livestock. Inside, the cabin was warm, genuinely warm, the kind of heat that came from a properly built fireplace and enough wood to not count every log. Raina stood in the main room, taking it in. Rough furniture, but well made. Clean floors. A kitchen that actually had supplies in it. It was so different from the desperate survival of her homestead that she almost wanted to cry. "I'll sleep out here," Gideon said, gesturing to a chair by the fire. "You take the bedroom." Raina turned to look at him. "We're married." "Doesn't mean you owe me anything tonight." He pulled off his jacket, hanging it on a peg. "Or any night, for that matter. Not until you're ready." "And if I'm never ready?" "Then we figure it out." He met her eyes. "I didn't marry you to force anything, Mrs. He stopped. "Raina, I married you because I meant what I said. We'll survive better together. Everything else will work out as we go." He was giving her an out, permission to keep walls up, permission to not feel things she wasn't ready to feel. Raina didn't know if that made it easier or harder. "Thank you," she said quietly. Gideon nodded. "There's hot water if you want to wash up, food in the kitchen if you're hungry, and if you need anything, I'll let you know." She escaped to the bedroom before the situation could get any more awkward, closed the door and leaned against it, her heart hammering. The room was simple but comfortable. A real bed with actual blankets. A window that looked out at the mountains, a trunk at the foot of the bed that probably held Gideon's things. Raina sat down on the edge of the mattress and put her head in her hands. She was married, again, to a man she'd met less than a week ago. Outside, she could hear Gideon moving around in the main room, the creak of the chair as he settled in, the pop of logs in the fireplace, the sound of someone who'd lived alone for so long that having another person in his space probably felt just as strange as it did for her. Raina lay down fully dressed, pulled the blankets up, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she'd figure out how to be a wife again. Tonight, she just needed to breathe and not think about all the ways this could destroy her. The wolves didn't howl that night. For the first time in 2 years, Raina fell asleep to silence. Raina woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed was too soft. The room was too warm. Then memory crashed back and she sat up quickly, her heart pounding. She was in Gideon Vale's cabin. No, their cabin. Because they were married now. The thought still felt unreal. She dressed in yesterday's clothes, the only one she had, and opened the bedroom door. Gideon stood at the stove, his back to her, doing something with a pan that sizzled. He'd already been up long enough to build up the fire and make coffee. The cabin was filled with warmth and the smell of cooking meat. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Morning." Raina's voice came out rough. She cleared her throat. You didn't have to sleep in the chair. Wasn't going to crowd you on the first night. Still, that couldn't have been comfortable. I've slept in worse places. He glanced over his shoulder. Coffee's on the table, breakfast in a minute. Raina poured herself a cup and sat down, wrapping her hands around the warmth. The coffee was strong and bitter and real. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had coffee that wasn't mostly grounds boiled twice to stretch the supply. Gideon brought over 2 plates, fried salt pork, eggs, and bread that looked fresh. Raina stared at it. This is too much. You need to eat. I mean, it's too much food. We can. He sat down across from her. I've got supplies. You don't have to ration everything anymore. The words hit her harder than they should have. She'd been rationing for so long that eating a full plate felt almost wrong. Wasteful, like she was taking something she hadn't earned. Gideon watched her push the food around. You planning to eat that or just reorganize it? Sorry, I'm just... She stopped, not sure how to explain. Not used to having enough. Yeah. Well, get used to it. He took a bite of his own food. You're going to need your strength. There's work to do. That, at least, was familiar territory. Work she understood. What kind of work? Depends. What are you good at? Chopping wood, shooting wolves, starving slowly. The corner of his mouth twitched. Those are useful skills, but I meant things like cooking, mending, managing supplies. Can you handle livestock? I had chickens before something killed them all, and I know enough about horses to keep them alive. That'll do? He finished his eggs. I've got 12 head of cattle, 4 horses, and a mule with an attitude problem. The cattle mostly take care of themselves, but the horses need work. Barn needs mucking. Fences need checking before the heavy snow hits. I can do that. I know you can. He stood up, collecting the plates. But not today. Today you rest. I don't need to rest. Yes, you do. You look like you haven't slept properly in months. I'm fine. Gideon turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression, not pity exactly, but a kind of understanding that made her throat tight. Raina, you've been fighting alone for 2 years. You're allowed to stop for one day. She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she didn't need anyone's concern or charity, but sitting there in the warm cabin with a full stomach for the first time in recent memory, she felt the exhaustion hit her all at once, the bone-deep tiredness she'd been out running for months. Maybe a few hours, she said quietly. Take the whole day. I've got things to handle outside anyway. He pulled on his coat. If you need anything, just holler. I'll hear you. After he left, Raina sat at the table listening to the silence. Not the terrifying silence of being alone. Just quiet. The peaceful kind that came from being safe and warm and not having to worry about wolves or debt collectors or whether she'd freeze to death before morning. She washed the dishes, explored the cabin slowly, taking inventory. The main room had a table, 2 chairs, and that massive fireplace. The kitchen was small but well stocked. Flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, canned goods. More food than she'd seen in one place in years. There was a bookshelf with maybe a dozen books, their spines worn from reading. She pulled one out. Poetry. She wouldn't have guessed Gideon Vale read poetry, but then again, she wouldn't have guessed a lot of things about him. The bedroom, her bedroom now, apparently, had that trunk at the foot of the bed. She opened it carefully, feeling like she was invading something private. Inside were men's clothes, neatly folded, a few personal items. A small wooden box that she didn't open. At the bottom, wrapped in cloth, was a framed photograph. Raina lifted it out carefully. A family portrait, a stern-looking couple with a young boy standing between them. The boy had Gideon's eyes, serious even then. His parents looked hard in the way frontier people often did, like they'd never had time for softness. She put it back exactly where she'd found it and closed the trunk. Outside, she could see Gideon working near the barn. Even from a distance, his size was startling, but he moved with surprising care, fixing something on the fence with steady hands, not rushing, not forcing, just working with the kind of patience that came from knowing the job would get done eventually. Raina went back to the main room and sat in the chair by the fire. She told herself she'd just rest for a minute, just sit and be warm and not think about anything. She woke up 3 hours later with a blanket draped over her that hadn't been there before. The first week was awkward. They moved around each other like strangers sharing a hotel room, overly polite and careful not to take up too much space. Gideon worked outside most days. Raina cleaned and cooked and tried to figure out how to be useful without getting in his way. Conversation came in short bursts, practical and surface level. Need more water from the creek. I'll get it. Woodpile's getting low on the south side. I'll split some after lunch. They ate meals together in near silence, the scrape of forks on plates louder than any words. At night, Gideon slept in the chair, or sometimes out in the barn. Raina took the bedroom and lay awake, feeling guilty about it. On the 5th day, she came outside to find him shoeing one of the horses. I can help with that, she offered. You know how to shoe a horse? Thomas taught me the basics. Gideon nodded toward the toolbox. Hold his legs steady then. They worked together in silence, Raina holding while Gideon shaped and fitted the shoe. His hands were huge but surprisingly gentle. The horse stayed calm under his touch, like it understood he wasn't going to hurt it. You're good at this, Raina said. Had a lot of practice. How long have you been up here, in this valley? 8 years. Built the cabin myself the first winter. That must have been brutal. It was. He finished nailing the shoe and moved to the next hoof. Spent most of that winter thinking I'd made a mistake, that I should have stayed in town where things were easier. Why didn't you? Because easy wasn't what I needed. He glanced up at her. I needed to prove I could build something that would last. Did you? You're standing in it. After that, things got slightly less awkward. Not comfortable exactly, but less like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. Raina started taking on more of the outdoor work. Gideon showed her how to check the fences, how to track the cattle through the high country, how to read the weather in the way the wind moved through the trees. She was a quick study, and he didn't waste time on unnecessary instructions. You learn fast, he said one afternoon as they were mending a section of fence. I don't have much choice. Still, most people need to be shown things 3 times before they stick. Most people didn't spend 2 years figuring out how to survive alone. He hammered in another nail. That why you're so damn stubborn? Survival instinct. Probably. Good. Means you won't quit when things get hard. Things are already hard. Harder than this. Raina looked at him. You expect things to get worse? I expect things to happen. Weather, predators, accidents, problems we can't see coming. He tested the fence post, making sure it held. But we'll handle them. Together. That word, together, still felt foreign in her mouth. She'd been alone for so long that the concept of partnership felt like trying to speak a language she'd forgotten. The night the temperature dropped below 0, Raina woke to the sound of something crashing outside. She grabbed Thomas's rifle from beside the bed and ran into the main room. Gideon was already up, pulling on his boots. Stay here, he said. What is it? Don't know yet. I'm coming with you. Raina, I'm not helpless, and you might need backup. He looked at her for a second, then nodded. Stay behind me. They went out into the freezing darkness together. The moon was bright enough to see by, turning everything silver and sharp. Near the barn, something was moving, something big. Bear. A massive grizzly, probably woken early from hibernation and desperate for food. It had torn into the barn door and was trying to get at the livestock inside. The horses were screaming. Get back to the cabin, Gideon said quietly. Not a chance. Raina, you going to argue or deal with the bear? He made a sound that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. Then he raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The bear turned and Raina felt her breath catch. It was enormous, scarred and hungry and absolutely fearless. It looked at them like they were the problem, not the other way around. Gideon fired again, this time closer. The bear roared, a sound that seemed to shake the ground, but didn't move. On 3, Gideon said quietly. We both shoot. Aim for center mass. Okay. 1, 2, 3. They fired together. The shots echoed off the mountains. The bear staggered, roared again, then turned and crashed back into the trees, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. Raina's hands were shaking. Is it dead? Maybe. Maybe just wounded and angry. Gideon lowered his rifle. Either way, we're not going after it in the dark. They checked the barn. The door was damaged, but the horses were okay, just spooked. Gideon calmed them with quiet words and steady hands while Raina held the lantern. That was too close, she said. Yeah. Does that happen often? Often enough. Why I don't like leaving the place unattended during winter. They went back inside. Gideon checked the rifle, reloaded it, set it by the door. Raina sat down by the fire, her heart still pounding. You did good out there, Gideon said. I didn't do anything except not panic. That's more than most people manage their first time facing down a grizzly. Thomas and I had a bear come after our chickens once. He shot at it until it left. This felt different, though. Because the stakes are higher now. What do you mean? Gideon sat down in his chair, stretching out his legs. Back then, you were just protecting property. Tonight, you were protecting something that matters. The horses matter? Everything here matters. The horses, the cattle, the cabin, all of it. Because it's not just about surviving anymore. It's about building something. He looked at her. That's the difference. Raina thought about that. He was right. 2 months ago, she'd been trying not to die. Now she was trying to protect something. The shift was subtle, but significant. I couldn't have done that alone, she said quietly. I know. That's why you wanted a partner, someone to stand with you when the bears come. Among other reasons. What other reasons? Gideon was quiet for a long moment. You really want to know? Yes. Because I was tired of talking to horses. Because I built this place for a family I didn't have. Because I'm 34 years old and I was starting to think maybe I'd die up here alone and no one would find me until spring. He met her eyes. Because I saw you out there fighting to survive and I thought, there. That's someone who understands what it costs to keep going. The words hung in the air between them. Raina didn't know what to say. She'd married him thinking it was purely practical, a business arrangement. But there was something in his voice now that suggested it had never been that simple. I'm not, she started, then stopped. I'm not good at this. At what? Marriage. Being a wife. I was married to Thomas for 3 years and I still don't think I ever figured it out. Maybe that's because you were trying to be what you thought you should be instead of who you are. And who am I? Someone who shoots at bears in the middle of the night. Someone who learns fast and works hard and doesn't quit. He leaned forward slightly. Someone who's exactly what I need. Raina felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, opening. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's true. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin like it was testing for weaknesses. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, and 2 people who'd started as strangers sat in silence that felt almost comfortable. I'm going to make coffee, Raina said finally, standing up. At 2 in the morning? Neither of us is sleeping after that. Might as well be awake with coffee. Can't argue with that logic. She made coffee and they sat up until dawn, talking in fits and starts about nothing important. Small things. The books on his shelf. The worst winter she remembered. The time he got snowed in for 3 weeks and had to dig a tunnel just to reach the barn. By the time the sun came up, Raina realized she'd laughed 3 times. Real laughs. Not the hollow kind she'd gotten used to. It felt dangerous. Like letting her guard down. Like trusting that maybe this strange arrangement could become something more than just survival. Bullshit. 2 weeks into the marriage, Margaret Chen showed up with a wagon full of Raina's things. Figured you'd want your belongings, Margaret said, climbing down. And I wanted to see this place everyone's been talking about. Everyone's talking about it? Oh, honey, the whole town's been gossiping about nothing else. Raina Holloway marrying Gideon Vale after knowing him for 5 minutes? That's the most exciting thing to happen since the Garrett barn burned down. Gideon appeared from the barn, and Margaret's eyes went wide. Well, you're even bigger up close. Mrs. Chen, Gideon nodded politely. Don't worry, I'm not here to cause trouble, just delivering Raina's things and being nosy. She looked around the property with obvious approval. You've got a nice setup here. Thank you. Treating her right? Margaret, Raina said quickly. What? I'm allowed to ask. You ran off and married a man none of us know. Someone's got to make sure you're not being kept prisoner up here. I'm not a prisoner. Good. Because I brought my husband's rifle just in case. Gideon's mouth twitched. That's good thinking, Mrs. Chen. Damn right it is. Margaret turned back to the wagon. Now help me get these boxes down before I throw my back out. They unloaded Raina's belongings, which wasn't much. Clothes, some kitchen items, a few books, and a wooden box that held letters from Thomas. Raina hadn't been able to leave those behind. Margaret stayed for coffee and grilled them both with questions disguised as polite conversation. How were they settling in? Was Raina eating enough? Did the cabin stay warm? Was Gideon snoring? I sleep in the chair, Gideon said. Margaret's eyebrows went up. Do you now? Margaret, Raina warned. I'm not saying anything. Just interesting, that's all. She sipped her coffee. You two are the most awkward married couple I've ever seen. We've only been married 2 weeks, Raina said. And how's that going? Fine. Just fine? Margaret, what do you want me to say? I want you to tell me you're happy, or at least not miserable. Margaret's voice softened. I've known you for 4 years, Raina. I watched you nearly kill yourself trying to keep that homestead running. I just want to make sure this isn't jumping from one disaster into another. Raina glanced at Gideon, who was studiously focused on his coffee. It's not a disaster, it's just new. We're figuring it out. And he's treating you well? Better than I expected. What's that supposed to mean? It means I thought this would be purely practical, but it's... She struggled to find the right words. He's not what I expected. Margaret looked between them with shrewd eyes. Well, maybe that's a good thing. Expectations can trap you just as much as anything else. After Margaret left, Raina unpacked her boxes while Gideon worked outside. She put her clothes in the bedroom, her books on the shelf next to his, her mother's quilt on the back of the chair. Small things that made the cabin feel less like his space and more like theirs. The box of Thomas's letters she kept separate, stored in the trunk where Gideon's photograph was. Some things were too private to leave out in the open. That night, Gideon didn't sleep in the chair. There's room, Raina said when she saw him making up his usual spot. In the bed, if you want. He looked at her. You sure? We're married, and that chair is destroying your back whether you admit it or not. I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't. I'm offering. She took a breath. It's a big bed. We can manage. So they did. Gideon took the far side, staying so close to the edge he was practically falling off. Raina took the other side and lay there rigid, hyper-aware of another person's presence, his breathing, the warmth coming off him, the way the mattress dipped under his weight. Raina? Yeah? Relax. I'm not going to touch you. I know. Then why are you so tense? Because this is weird. Yeah, it is. She heard him shift slightly. But we'll get used to it. How do you know? Because we've gotten used to everything else so far. He had a point. They'd gotten used to eating together, working together, existing in the same space. Maybe they could get used to this too. Raina closed her eyes and focused on breathing. Eventually, exhaustion won and she fell asleep. When she woke in the morning, she'd rolled toward the middle of the bed at some point during the night. Her hand was stretched out, fingers barely touching Gideon's arm where he lay on his back, still and careful even in sleep. She pulled her hand back quickly before he could wake up and notice. Shast. The real winter hit in early December. It came on fast, a blizzard that buried the valley in 3 feet of snow in less than 2 days. They'd been preparing for weeks, but preparation only went so far when nature decided to show its teeth. For 5 days, they were completely snowed in. The world beyond the cabin disappeared into white. Gideon dug a path to the barn twice a day to tend the animals. Raina kept the fire going and cooked and tried not to think about how small the cabin felt with nowhere else to go. On the 3rd day, cabin fever started setting in. You're pacing, Gideon said from his chair. I'm not pacing. You've walked from the kitchen to the window 12 times in the last hour. I'm just restless. I noticed. Raina stopped at the window, staring out at the endless white. How do you stand it? Being trapped up here every winter? I don't think of it as being trapped. I think of it as being held. That's the same thing. No, it's not. Trapped is when you want to leave but can't. Held is when you're exactly where you need to be. She turned to look at him. And you're always exactly where you need to be? Most of the time, yeah. Must be nice, being that certain about everything. I'm not certain about everything. He closed the book he'd been reading. I'm certain about this place, about surviving, about making sure we get through the winter. The rest, he shrugged. The rest I'm figuring out same as you. Like what? Like how to be married to someone I barely know. Like whether I'm doing this right. Like whether you're going to wake up one day and regret saying yes. The admission surprised her. He always seemed so sure of himself, so steady. It hadn't occurred to her that he might be just as uncertain about all this as she was. I haven't regretted it yet, she said quietly. Yet. That's a hell of a qualifier. Well, what do you want me to say? That I'm thrilled? That this is everything I ever dreamed of? No, I want you to be honest. Fine. Honest. Raina crossed her arms. I don't regret marrying you, but I also don't know what this is. We're not really married, not in any normal sense. We're just two people sharing space and pretending that's enough. Pretending? Yes, pretending. Because neither of us is brave enough to admit that maybe we want more than just survival. The words came out harsher than she'd intended. The silence that followed felt heavy, charged with all the things neither of them had said since that first day. Gideon stood up slowly. You think I don't want more? I think you wanted a partner. Someone practical. Someone who wouldn't quit. You're right. That's what I wanted. He took a step closer. But that's not what I'm getting. What are you getting? Someone who fights bears at 2 a.m. Someone who makes me laugh without trying. Someone who looks at me like I'm more than just the mountain man everyone's afraid of. He stopped a few feet away. Someone I think about even when she's standing right in front of me. Raina's breath caught. Gideon, I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm just saying, I'm not pretending anything. This is real for me. The room felt too small suddenly, too warm, too full of words that couldn't be taken back. I don't know how to do this, Raina said. Do what? Feel things, trust things. I barely survived losing Thomas. I can't, her voice cracked. I can't go through that again. So don't. It's not that simple. Why not? I'm not asking you to fall in love with me tomorrow. I'm just asking you to stop fighting so hard against the possibility. And what if I can't? Then we keep going the way we are. Partners, friends, whatever you need. He met her eyes. But I'm not going to pretend I don't care about you just because it's easier. The blizzard howled outside, shaking the walls. Inside, everything felt too still, too quiet, too important. Raina took a breath, then another. Okay. Okay, what? Okay, I'll try. I'll try to stop fighting it. That's all I'm asking. They stood there as the small cabin while the world disappeared outside. Two people learning how to be honest about things that scared them both. That night, when they went to bed, Raina didn't stay on her side. She moved closer, just a few inches, close enough that their shoulders touched. Gideon didn't move away. Neither of them slept much, but for once, it wasn't because of fear or cold or loneliness. It was because something was shifting between them, slow and careful and terrifying. The blizzard lasted 2 more days, and by the time it ended, things had changed. Not dramatically. There was no grand moment or declaration. But Raina stopped treating the cabin like temporary shelter and started treating it like home. Gideon stopped sleeping so carefully and started relaxing, taking up space instead of constantly making room for her. They worked together more easily, talked more, laughed more. Small touches became normal, her hand on his arm, his fingers brushing hers when he handed her something. Margaret would have been insufferable if she could see them. The awkward newlyweds were slowly becoming something else. Something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. The winter was just beginning, but for the first time, Raina wasn't counting down the days until spring. She was just living them, one at a time, beside someone who made survival feel less like a fight and more like a choice worth making. Christmas came quietly to the mountain valley. Raina woke to find Gideon already up, as usual, but the cabin smelled different, sweet. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and walked into the main room to find him pulling something out of the oven. What are you doing? He nearly dropped the pan. Making breakfast. That's not breakfast, that's... She moved closer. Is that cake? Might be. You made a cake? Don't sound so shocked. I know how to cook more than just salt pork and beans. He set it on the table. It's Christmas. Figured we should have something special. Raina stared at the slightly lopsided cake. It wasn't fancy, the frosting was uneven, and there were no decorations, but the gesture hit her square in the chest. I didn't get you anything, she said quietly. Didn't ask for anything. Still, you made a cake, and I didn't even think, Raina. He turned to face her. I didn't make it so you'd feel obligated. I made it because I wanted to. That's allowed. She didn't know what to say to that. Thomas had always made a big deal about Christmas, presents and plans and expectations that she'd somehow never quite met. This felt different, simpler, more real. They ate cake for breakfast, and it was terrible and perfect at the same time. Too dense, not sweet enough. But they sat across from each other at the table and ate it anyway, and Raina caught herself smiling more than once. What? Gideon asked. Nothing. This is just nice. Nice, high praise. I mean it. This is the best Christmas I've had in 3 years. Something shifted in his expression. That's a pretty low bar. Maybe, but it's true. She pushed crumbs around her plate. Thomas always wanted Christmas to be this big production. He'd get stressed about making everything perfect and then get upset when it wasn't. This is better. Just simple. Simple's all I know how to do. Then you're doing it right. They spent the day inside while the wind howled and snow piled higher against the windows. Gideon worked on repairing a saddle while Raina mended clothes that had needed mending for weeks. The kind of quiet domestic task that felt comfortable now instead of awkward. Around noon, Gideon set down his tools. I do have something for you. Not much, but... He pulled a small cloth bundle from his pocket. Raina unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a knife, small, sharp, with a handle made from carved bone. The craftsmanship was beautiful, intricate. You made this? Last winter. Didn't have anyone to give it to then. She ran her thumb over the smooth handle. It's beautiful. It's practical. Good blade. Won't rust. He looked almost embarrassed. Figured you could use something better than that old kitchen knife you've been carrying. I love it. It's just a knife. No, it's not. She met his eyes. It's perfect. Thank you. That night, Raina lay awake long after Gideon fell asleep beside her. The knife was on the bedside table within reach. A tool. A weapon. A gift that said he understood her in ways she hadn't expected anyone to understand her again. She turned onto her side, watching the way moonlight through the window caught the planes of his face. He looked younger when he slept. Less guarded. In the dark, it was easier to admit things she wouldn't say in daylight. She was falling for him. Not the desperate falling of someone who needed rescuing. The slow, steady falling of someone who'd found solid ground and realized they wanted to stay. It terrified her. But lying there listening to him breathe, she thought maybe terror wasn't always a bad thing. Maybe sometimes it meant you were brave enough to try again. Heats. The rider came 3 days after Christmas. Raina heard the horse before she saw it, hoofbeats struggling through deep snow. She was outside hanging laundry that would freeze before it dried, but at least the wind would beat some of the dirt out. A man on a gray horse emerged from the tree line. Well-dressed. Too well-dressed for riding through mountain winter. Behind him, 2 more riders followed, both armed. Raina's hand went to the knife on her belt. The new one. She didn't pull it, but the weight was reassuring. Can I help you? She called out. The lead rider stopped about 20 feet away. He was maybe 50, with sharp eyes and the kind of smile that didn't reach them. I'm looking for Mrs. Raina Holloway. That's not my name anymore. Ah, so you did marry him. The rumors are true. The man looked past her toward the cabin. Is your husband home? Who's asking? My name is Silas Crow. I'm a land broker out of Helena. I have business to discuss with Mrs. Vale and her husband. Everything about this felt wrong. The timing, the armed men, the way Crow was looking at the property like he was already calculating its worth. My husband's working. State your business. It's rather sensitive. Better discussed inside, perhaps? I prefer out here. Crow's smile tightened. Very well. I'm here regarding a debt owed by your late husband, Thomas Holloway. I have documentation showing he took out a substantial loan 3 years ago, using your homestead as collateral. That debt has gone unpaid, and according to territorial law, that's a lie. I beg your pardon? Thomas never took out a loan. I would have known. Perhaps he didn't want to worry you. Many men keep financial troubles from their wives. Crow pulled papers from his coat. I have the signed documents here. $400 plus accumulated interest. The total now stands at nearly $600. Raina's blood went cold. Even if that were true, and it's not, that debt died with Thomas. I'm afraid not. When you remarried, your new husband assumed all debts and properties associated with your previous marriage. It's territorial law, Mrs. Vale. Mr. Vale now owes this money. Get off our property. I understand this is upsetting, but I said get off our property. One of the armed men shifted in his saddle. Raina's hand moved to her knife. The movement was small, but everyone noticed it. There's no need for hostility, Crow said smoothly. I'm simply here to inform you of the situation. You have 14 days to pay the debt in full. If payment isn't received, I'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings. He tucked the papers away. I'll be staying at the hotel in town if you wish to discuss terms. He turned his horse and rode off, his men following. Raina stood there shaking, not from cold but from rage and fear mixing into something that tasted like metal in her mouth. Gideon appeared from the barn, rifle in hand. I heard voices. We have a problem. Inside, Raina paced while Gideon read through the papers Crow had left. His face was unreadable, which somehow made it worse. She wanted him to be angry, wanted him to throw the papers in the fire and call them garbage. Instead, he just read carefully, methodically, like he was looking for something. This is forged, she said. It has to be. Thomas would have told me if he took out a loan. Maybe. Maybe? You think he'd hide something like that from me? I think people do desperate things when they're scared. Gideon set the papers down. And I think these look real enough to cause trouble whether they are or not. So what do? We find out if they're legitimate. If they're not, we prove it. If they are, they're not. Raina, listen to me. I need you to think. Is there any chance, any at all, that Thomas borrowed money without telling you? She wanted to scream at him for even asking, but she forced herself to really think about it. Those last few months before Thomas died, he'd been stressed, worried. They'd had a bad year with the livestock, lost 2 calves to wolves. The vegetable garden had failed. He talked about going to town more often than usual, coming back quieter. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe. But $400? We never had anything worth that much to borrow against. The land itself might have been enough collateral. Gideon stood up. I'm going to town. Talk to the clerk at the land office, see what records they have. I'm coming with you. No, you stay here. Keep the rifle close. Why? You think they'll come back? I think men like Crow don't operate alone. And I think leaving the place undefended would be stupid. He pulled on his coat. I'll be back before dark. Don't open the door for anyone. Gideon? He stopped, turned back. For a second she thought he might say something important. Instead he just said, Bar the door behind me. After he left, the cabin felt too big and too small at the same time. Raina tried to keep busy, fed the fire, checked the windows, made coffee she didn't drink. But her mind kept spinning through the same thoughts. $600. They didn't have $600. Even if they sold half the livestock and everything else of value, they'd maybe make $400. And winter wasn't over. They needed those animals to survive. The alternative was losing everything Gideon had built. The cabin, the ranch. 8 years of work destroyed because of a debt that might not even be real. Unless it was real. Unless Thomas had been desperate enough to borrow money and lie about it. Unless he died before he could fix it and left her holding a bomb she didn't know existed until it went off. Around noon, Raina heard horses again. She grabbed the rifle and went to the window. 3 men this time, different from before. They stopped near the barn, dismounted, started looking around like they owned the place. Raina's heart hammered. She went to the door, cracked it open just enough to be heard. This is private property. You need to leave. One of the men, younger than the others, with a face that suggested he enjoyed causing problems, grinned at her. Just looking around, making sure everything's secure. Secure for who? For Mr. Crow. Once the property transfers, he'll want to know what he's getting. The property isn't transferring. Now get out of here before I shoot you for trespassing. That's awful hostile, ma'am. That's me being polite. Hostile comes next. She raised the rifle to her shoulder. The men exchanged looks. The young one's grin faded slightly. We're just doing our job, he said, and I'm doing mine, which is protecting my home. Last chance, leave or find out how good my aim is. They mounted up, but slowly, making it clear they weren't scared, just choosing to go. As they rode off, the young one called back. 14 days, Mrs. Vale. Then this place belongs to Mr. Crow, whether you like it or not. Raina kept the rifle up until they disappeared into the trees. Then she locked the door, checked every window, and sat down at the table with her hands shaking. This was real. Whatever was happening, it was real and it was dangerous, and she had no idea how to fight it. Gideon came back 3 hours before sunset, his face grim. The papers are filed, he said without preamble. Official records show Thomas Holloway took out a loan from Crow 3 years ago. $400. Signed and witnessed. Raina felt the world tilt. That's impossible. The clerk showed me the original documents. Thomas's signature is on them. Then they're forged. Someone copied his signature. Maybe, but proving that would take time we don't have. Gideon poured himself coffee with hands that were steadier than his voice. And even if we prove forgery, that's a legal battle that could take months. Meanwhile, Crow has legal standing to seize the property. So that's it? We just give up? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? Gideon was quiet for a long moment. I'm saying we have two choices. We can try to pay the debt, which means selling most of the livestock and probably still coming up short. Or we can fight it. Try to prove the documents are fake, but fighting means lawyers and courts and time. There's a third option, Raina said. What's that? We find out who Silas Crow really is and what he's really after. Because this doesn't feel like a simple debt collection. This feels personal. Why would it be personal? He doesn't know us. He doesn't need to know us. He just needs to want this land. She stood up, pacing. Think about it. This valley is protected. Good water, good grazing. Someone could build a real operation here if they had the capital. Maybe Crow's been looking for a way to get his hands on it, and we just gave him the perfect excuse. That's a lot of speculation. Is it? Those men who came by today, they weren't debt collectors. They were surveyors, checking out the property like they already owned it. Gideon's jaw tightened. They came here? 3 of them. I ran them off, but they'll be back. She turned to face him. This isn't about money, Gideon. This is about someone trying to take everything you've built, and they're using my dead husband to do it. The rage that crossed his face was something she'd never seen before. Not hot anger, cold fury, the kind that made men dangerous. Then we need proof, he said quietly. Something that shows those documents are forged. How? I don't know yet, but I'm not handing over 8 years of my life to a con man without a fight. They stayed up late planning, trying to figure out angles and approaches. Margaret might know something about Crow. She knew everyone's business in town. The land office clerk might remember details that weren't in the official records. Someone somewhere had to know something that could help them. When they finally went to bed, exhaustion pulling them down, Raina curled against Gideon's side without thinking about it. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close. We'll figure this out, he said into the darkness. What if we can't? Then we start over somewhere else. You'd do that? Give up everything you built here? I'd do a lot of things to keep you safe. The words hung in the air between them. Raina pressed closer, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and leather that clung to him. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For bringing this mess into your life. If you hadn't married me, then I'd still be alone in this cabin talking to horses. And you'd probably be dead by now from wolves or cold or stubbornness. His hand moved to her hair, gentle. I don't regret marrying you, Raina. Not for a second, even with all this. You might regret it when we're homeless. We won't be homeless. Worst case, we take the livestock and head north. Start fresh. Plenty of land up there. That's not the worst case. What's the worst case? The worst case is you get hurt trying to protect something that's already lost. She lifted her head to look at him in the darkness. Promise me you won't do anything stupid. Define stupid. Gideon. I'm not going to promise I'll just roll over and let Crow take everything, but I'm not going to get myself killed either. He touched her face. I've got too much to lose now. She kissed him then, not thinking about it, not planning it, just needing to feel something other than fear and rage and helplessness. He kissed her back, carefully at first, like he was afraid she'd break, then deeper when she pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry, and full of all the things they hadn't said to each other yet. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "We should sleep," he said. "I don't want to sleep. Raina, I want to feel alive. I want to feel like we have a future worth fighting for. I want—" Her voice cracked. "I want to stop being scared." He pulled back enough to look at her. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Because if we do this now, it's not about fear or distraction. I need you to want this for the right reasons." "And what are the right reasons?" "That you want me, not just safety or security or someone to help you survive. Me." She kissed him again, softer this time. "I want you, you stubborn mountain man. All of you. Have since that day in the blizzard when you admitted you were tired of being alone. That was weeks ago. I know, I've been too scared to say it. And now? Now I'm more scared of losing you than I am of admitting I care." He kissed her like she was something precious, like she was the thing he'd been building this whole ranch for without knowing it. And for the first time since Thomas died, Raina let herself feel something other than grief. She let herself feel hope. Masm. Morning came too soon, bringing reality with it. They had 13 days left to either pay $600 or prove the debt was fraudulent. Gideon rode out early to talk to Margaret and anyone else who might have information about Crow. Raina stayed at the ranch, rifle close, watching for more unwanted visitors. Around midday, she was feeding the horses when she noticed something odd. One of the fence posts near the tree line had a piece of cloth tied to it. Red fabric, bright against the snow. She hadn't tied it there. Gideon hadn't mentioned it. Raina approached carefully, one hand on her knife. When she got close enough to see clearly, her blood went cold. Carved into the post were the words, 12 days. Someone had been here, on their property. Close enough to the cabin to leave a message while she was inside, oblivious. She yanked the cloth down and ran back to the cabin, locking the door behind her. Her heart hammered. They were being watched, threatened, and Gideon was in town, too far away to help if something happened. Raina checked the rifle, made sure it was loaded, positioned herself by the window where she could see anyone approaching. The afternoon dragged on. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. When she finally heard Gideon's horse, the relief was so strong it almost knocked her down. She had the door open before he dismounted. "Someone was here," she said. "They left a message. A threat." Gideon's face went hard. She showed him the post, the carved numbers. He studied it silently, his jaw working. "They're trying to scare us," he said finally. "It's working." "I know." He turned to her. "I talked to Margaret. She says Crow's done this before. 3 other properties in the last 5 years. Shows up with old debts, pressures people into selling cheap or just forecloses. Always targets widows or people struggling. So this is a pattern." "Yeah, but here's the thing. One of those widows fought back, a woman named Elizabeth Porter. She claimed the debt was forged and refused to leave. Crow took her to court and won." Raina's hopes sank. "So we can't fight him." "I didn't say that. Porter lost because she fought alone. But Margaret says there might be others who were too scared to fight. If we can find them, get them to come forward, we might have enough to show this is fraud." "That's a long shot." "It's the only shot we've got unless you want to hand him $600 we don't have." She thought about this cabin, the ranch, the life they were just starting to build together. Thought about running away and starting over somewhere else, always looking over their shoulders, always wondering if the past would catch up. "Then we find them," she said. "However long it takes. We find every person Crow screwed over, and we make them listen. That could take weeks, maybe months. Then we start now." Gideon looked at her, really looked at her, and something fierce and proud moved across his face. "You really are the stubbornest woman I've ever met." "You say that like it's a bad thing." "It's not. It's exactly what we need." They spent the evening making plans. Gideon would ride to the other properties Margaret had mentioned, try to find people willing to talk. Raina would go through Thomas's things one more time, looking for anything that might prove he never took out alone. It was a desperate plan, a long-shot plan. But it was something, and something was better than giving up. That night, lying in bed with Gideon's arm around her and fear gnawing at her insides, Raina made a promise to herself. She'd survived Thomas's death. She'd survived 2 years alone in the wilderness. She'd survived becoming someone new. She'd be damned if she let some con man take away the first real future she'd had in years, whatever it took, however long it took. She was going to fight. Gideon left before dawn, riding out to find the other people Crow had targeted. Raina watched him go from the cabin window, her chest tight with worry. The valley looked deceptively peaceful in the early morning light, snow sparkling like nothing bad could ever happen here. She knew better now. After feeding the animals and securing the barn, Raina went back inside to tackle the one thing she'd been avoiding for 2 years, Thomas's personal belongings. She'd kept them in a wooden crate under the bed, too painful to look at, but too important to throw away. Now she dumped everything onto the kitchen table and started sorting through it methodically. Letters from his mother back east, a pocket watch that had stopped working, a journal he'd kept sporadically, mostly notes about weather and livestock. She flipped through the journal pages, looking for anything about money or loans or desperation. Most of it was mundane, boring even, but then she found an entry from 3 months before he died. Met with a man in town today. Says he can help with the debt situation. Too good to be true, probably, but I'm running out of options. Haven't told Raina yet. Don't want to worry her unless this works out. Raina's hands shook. So there had been debt. Thomas had been hiding something, but what debt? They'd been careful, frugal. They'd never borrowed money from anyone as far as she knew. She kept reading. 2 weeks later, another entry. Signed papers today. Feels wrong, but what choice do I have? 400 will keep us going through next year. Just need to make it work. Raina can never know how close we came to losing everything. The words blurred. Raina set the journal down and pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe through the anger and grief twisting in her chest. Thomas had taken out that loan. It was real, and he'd hidden it from her because he was trying to protect her, trying to fix things alone instead of letting her help. Just like she'd tried to survive alone after he died. They'd both been stubborn fools. She kept searching through the crate, looking for anything else useful. At the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, she found a small leather pouch. Inside were papers, receipts, bills, and a letter addressed to Thomas from someone named William Hartley. Raina unfolded the letter carefully. Thomas, I'm writing this to warn you about Silas Crow. The man is not who he claims to be. He's been targeting struggling homesteaders across the territory, offering loans with impossible terms. By the time people realize what they've signed, it's too late. I made the mistake of trusting him 2 years ago and lost my family's land because of it. Don't make the same mistake I did. If you've already signed papers, find a lawyer. Get out while you still can. Your friend William. The letter was dated 4 months before Thomas died, which meant he'd known. He'd known Crow was dangerous, and he'd signed the papers anyway because he was desperate and running out of time. Raina's throat burned. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to shake him and demand to know why he hadn't told her, why he'd thought carrying this alone was somehow protecting her. But Thomas was 3 years dead and buried on a hillside, and all his good intentions had done was leave her holding a disaster. She folded the letter carefully and added it to the small pile of evidence. It wasn't much. One journal entry and a warning letter didn't prove the loan documents were forged, but it proved Thomas had known he was getting into something bad, that he'd been warned. Maybe that would be enough. Around noon, Raina heard horses again. She grabbed the rifle and positioned herself by the window, ready for another confrontation with Crow's men. But the rider who emerged from the trees was Margaret Chen, her wagon loaded down with supplies. Raina opened the door. What are you doing here? Bringing you food and making sure you're still alive. Margaret climbed down, her face stern. Gideon came by this morning. Told me what's happening. You two are in deep trouble. We're handling it. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're about to lose everything to a con man and you've got, 11 days left? 10 days, Raina corrected, and we're working on it. Margaret hauled a crate of supplies up to the porch. Working on it how? Gideon's riding around trying to find people who are probably too scared to talk. You're here alone again, which we both know is a bad idea. And Crow's sitting in town acting like he already owns this place. Then help us. Raina took the crate from her. You said you know things about Crow. Tell me everything. Inside, over coffee that Margaret declared too weak, the older woman laid out what she knew. Crow had been working in Montana Territory for about 7 years. Always well-dressed, always charming, always had official-looking papers. He targeted widows and struggling families, offering loans that seemed reasonable at first. The terms were buried in legal language most people couldn't understand. Elizabeth Porter fought him, Margaret said, took him to court. But Crow had better lawyers and the judge ruled in his favor. Elizabeth lost her ranch, and last I heard she's living with her daughter in Oregon. What about William Hartley? Raina showed her the letter. Margaret's face went pale. Where did you get this? It was in Thomas's things. Who is he? Was. William Hartley died 4 years ago. Hunting accident, they said. But there were rumors. What kind of rumors? The kind where a man starts making noise about fraud and then conveniently ends up dead in the woods with a bullet in his back. Margaret set down her cup. Raina, this is bigger than you think. Crow isn't just a con man. He's dangerous. People who get in his way tend to disappear or have accidents. Then we need to be careful. No, you need to leave. Pack up what you can carry and get out before it's too late. I'm not leaving. Raina, I said I'm not leaving. Gideon built this place. We're not just handing it over because some criminal says we have to. Margaret looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. You're just as stubborn as you were when you were trying to survive that homestead alone. Except now you've got someone else to lose. The words hit hard. Raina thought about Gideon riding through the territory trying to find evidence. Thought about what would happen if Crow decided he was becoming a problem that needed to be eliminated. What should I do, Amy? She asked quietly. You want my honest advice? Sell, not to Crow. He'd cheat you. But sell to someone legitimate. Take the money and start over somewhere else. Somewhere Crow can't touch you. And if we did that, how long before he does this to someone else? How many more families lose everything because we were too scared to fight? Better them than you dead. That's a terrible philosophy. It's a survival philosophy, which is what you used to understand before you married a man who makes you want to be brave. Margaret wasn't wrong. Before Gideon, survival had been everything. Now she wanted more than survival. She wanted justice. She wanted to win. She wanted to protect not just their ranch, but every other person Crow might target next. It was either admirable or stupid, probably both. After Margaret left, Raina spent the afternoon going through more of Thomas's papers. She found receipts, notes, and a few letters that suggested he'd been struggling financially for longer than she'd realized. The harvest had been bad 2 years running. They'd lost livestock to disease. Thomas had been borrowing small amounts from neighbors to make ends meet. The $400 from Crow must have seemed like salvation. One big loan to pay off all the small debts and start fresh. Except it had been a trap, and Thomas had walked right into it. By the time Gideon returned that evening, Raina had a pile of documents spread across the table and a headache from trying to make sense of it all. Any luck? She asked. Some. He looked exhausted. Found 2 of the families Margaret mentioned. One of them is willing to testify that Crow forged documents. The other one's too scared. That's something, at least. It's not enough. We need more proof, more witnesses, something concrete that shows this is a pattern. He noticed the papers on the table. What's all this? Thomas's financial records. He was in worse shape than I thought, borrowing from everyone. The Crow loan was real, Gideon. Thomas signed those papers. She watched his face carefully, waiting for anger or blame or disappointment. Instead, he just nodded slowly. Okay, so the loan is legitimate. That doesn't mean we can't fight the foreclosure. How? The loan terms. There might be something illegal in the contract itself. Usurious interest rates, predatory lending practices. If we can prove Crow structured the loan knowing Thomas couldn't pay it back, we might have grounds to challenge it. That would require a lawyer. Yeah. We don't have money for a lawyer. I know. Gideon sat down heavily. But I might know someone who'd help us anyway. Who? A man named Henry Blackwood. Used to practice law in Helena before he retired. Lives about 20 miles north of here. I helped him out of a bad situation a few years back. He might owe me a favor. That's a long ride in this weather. It's the only option we've got. He looked at her. Unless you want to sell, cut our losses and start over somewhere else. Raina thought about Margaret's advice. About survival versus fighting. About the difference between running and standing your ground. No, she said. We fight. Even if we lose? Even if we lose. Because at least we'll know we tried. Something fierce and proud moved across Gideon's face. Then I'll ride out tomorrow, see if Blackwood will help. I'm going with you. Raina, don't. Don't tell me to stay here alone while you risk yourself. We're in this together. That's what you said, together. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Together. But we leave before dawn. It's a hard ride, and we need to be back before dark. They spent the evening preparing. Gideon checked the horses, made sure they had supplies. Raina packed food and extra ammunition. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew what they were really preparing for. The possibility that this trip wouldn't solve anything and they'd come back to face Crow with nothing. That night, lying in bed with Gideon's arms around her, Raina allowed herself a moment of weakness. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. What if this doesn't work? What if Blackwood can't help us? Then we try something else. And if there is no something else? Gideon was quiet for a moment. Then we pack up what we can carry and we leave. We head north into Canada where Crow can't follow. We start over. Just like that? Just like that. I'm not losing you over a piece of land. I don't care how much work I put into it. But this is your home. You're my home. He pulled her closer. The land is just dirt and trees. You're what matters. Raina pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, letting his words sink in. She'd spent 2 years thinking survival was about holding on to the physical things, the homestead, the memories, the life she'd built with Thomas. But maybe survival was really about knowing what to fight for and what to let go. Maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was a person. They left before the sun came up, riding through darkness that slowly turned gray and then gold. The trail north was treacherous, covered in ice and hidden rocks. But the horses were sure-footed, and Gideon knew the way. Around mid-morning, they stopped to rest the horses and eat the food Raina had packed, jerky and hard bread. Not much, but it would keep them going. How much farther, Raina asked. Another 2 hours, maybe? Depends on the trail conditions. And you're sure this Blackwood will help us? No, but I'm sure he'll listen. Gideon took a drink from his canteen. He's a good man, fair. If there's something wrong with those loan documents, he'll find it. And if there's not, then we move to Plan B. What's Plan B? Haven't figured that out yet. Despite everything, Raina almost laughed. Here they were, riding through the wilderness with 9 days left before they lost everything, and Gideon's plan was to make it up as they went. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost liberating. No more carefully controlled survival, just action and reaction and trust. They reached Blackwood's cabin around noon. It was smaller than Gideon's, built into a hillside with a view that probably looked spectacular in summer. Now it just looked isolated and cold. An older man emerged onto the porch as they approached, tall, thin, with white hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Gideon Vale, he said. Didn't expect to see you before spring. Henry, sorry to drop in unannounced. You saved my life 3 years ago. You can drop in whenever you want. Blackwood's gaze shifted to Raina. And who's this? My wife, Raina. Wife? Blackwood's eyebrows went up. Well, congratulations. Come inside before you both freeze. The cabin was warm and cluttered with books and papers. Blackwood was clearly a man who'd retired from law but hadn't retired from thinking like a lawyer. Over coffee, Gideon laid out the situation. The loan, Crow's history, the foreclosure notice. Blackwood listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a scrap of paper. When Gideon finished, Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. Silas Crow, he said finally. I know that name. He tried to pull something similar about 6 years ago. Widow in Silver City. I was still practicing then. Helped her fight the case. What happened? Raina asked. We won. Proved the loan documents had been altered after signing. But Crow had good lawyers. They appealed. By the time the appeal was heard, the widow had died from influenza and her children just wanted it over. They settled. So Crow got the property anyway. Eventually, yes. Blackwood tapped his fingers on the table. The man is a professional predator. He finds people at their most vulnerable and traps them with legal paperwork most can't understand. Can you help us? Gideon asked. Let me see the documents. Raina pulled them from her bag. Blackwood spread them out on the table and began reading, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is bad," he said after a while. "How bad?" "The interest rate is technically legal, but barely. The repayment terms are structured to make it nearly impossible to pay off early. And there's a clause here." He pointed to a section buried in dense legal language. "This clause says that if the borrower dies, the debt transfers to any spouse, current or future. That's unusual. Most loans would require the estate to settle the debt, not a new spouse who wasn't party to the original agreement." "But it's legal?" Raina asked. "Technically, but it suggests this loan was designed specifically to trap not just Thomas, but anyone he might be connected to." Blackwood looked up at her. "Did you know about this loan when you married Thomas?" "No." "And when you married Gideon, did anyone inform you that this debt would transfer to him?" "No. Crow only showed up after we were married." "That's suspicious timing." Blackwood made more notes. "Crow might have been watching, waiting for you to remarry so he could ensnare someone with deeper pockets." The thought made Raina's skin crawl. The idea that Crow had been circling like a vulture, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Can we fight this?" Gideon asked. "Maybe." "The timing is questionable. The loan terms are predatory. If I can prove Crow has a pattern of targeting vulnerable people with these specific contract clauses, we might be able to argue fraud." Blackwood looked between them. "But it won't be easy, and it won't be fast. We're looking at months of legal proceedings." "We don't have months. We have 9 days." "Then we'll need to buy more time. I can file an injunction, delay the foreclosure while we investigate. That might give us a few weeks." "And if the injunction is denied?" "Then you pay the debt, or you lose the property." Blackwood's expression was sympathetic but honest. "I won't lie to you. This is a long shot. Crow has done this before and he's good at it. But if you're willing to fight, I'll help you." Gideon looked at Raina. She nodded. "We're willing to fight," Gideon said. "Good. Then leave these documents with me. I'll start preparing the injunction tonight. You two need to find me more evidence. Talk to everyone Crow has targeted. Get their stories. Get their documents if they still have them. The more we can show this is a pattern, the better our chances." They left Blackwood's cabin with something they hadn't had before. Hope. Fragile, uncertain hope. But it was better than nothing. The ride back was faster, urgency pushing them. They needed to find more victims, needed to build a case, needed to do in days what would normally take weeks. They were maybe 5 miles from home when Gideon suddenly pulled his horse to a stop. "What is it?" Raina asked. "Riders, behind us." She turned. In the distance, 3 men on horses were following their trail, too far back to identify, but close enough to be a threat. "Crow's men?" she asked. "Probably." "What do we do?" "We run." They pushed the horses hard, racing through the forest as the light began to fail. The riders behind them kept pace, neither gaining nor falling back, just following, watching. When they finally reached the ranch, Gideon dismounted quickly and grabbed the rifle from his saddle. "Get inside. Bar the door." "Gideon!" "Do it. Now!" Raina ran for the cabin while Gideon positioned himself near the barn, rifle ready. The 3 riders emerged from the trees, slowing as they approached. They stopped just outside rifle range, close enough to be seen, but too far to be threatened. One of them, the young one who'd come by before, called out, "Mr. Vale! Mrs. Vale! Mr. Crow wants you to know he's a patient man, but his patience has limits. 8 days left. Think carefully about how you want to spend them." "Tell Crow to go to hell," Gideon shouted back. The young man laughed. "That's what they all say, right up until they lose everything." He tipped his hat mockingly. "See you soon, folks." The riders turned and disappeared back into the trees. Gideon waited until they were completely out of sight before lowering the rifle and coming inside. Raina was shaking, not from fear, from rage. "They followed us all the way from Blackwoods." "Yeah." "Which means they know we're building a case." "Yeah." "Which means they're going to try to stop us." Gideon set the rifle down and pulled her into his arms. "Let them try." But lying in bed that night, both of them exhausted and frightened and running out of time, Raina wondered if trying would be enough. Wondered if courage and stubbornness and desperate hope could really stand against men who had money and power and no conscience. She pressed closer to Gideon, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong against her cheek. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. That had to count for something. That had to be enough. The next 3 days were a blur of writing and talking and gathering pieces of a puzzle that Crow had thought he'd hidden well enough. Gideon and Raina split up to cover more ground. She took the southern properties while he went east. Each stop was another story of desperation and manipulation. A farmer who'd signed papers he couldn't read. A widow who'd believed Crow was helping her when he was actually setting a trap. A young couple who'd lost their first home before their first child was born. The stories were all different, but the pattern was identical. Crow offered salvation at exactly the moment people were too desperate to question it. By the time they realized what they'd signed, it was too late. On the fourth day, Raina found something that changed everything. She was at the home of a woman named Sarah Mitchell, 73 years old and living with her son after losing her ranch 5 years ago. Sarah had been reluctant to talk at first, shame and defeat having made her silent about what had happened. But Raina knew that shame, knew how it felt to lose everything while everyone watched. So she sat at Sarah's kitchen table and told her own story, not the sanitized version she gave most people, but the real one. The wolves, the bleeding hands. The night she'd been so hungry, she'd considered just walking into the snow and not coming back. Sarah listened with wet eyes. When Raina finished, the old woman was quiet for a long moment. "You survived," Sarah said finally. "Barely, but you did. And now you're fighting back." "Trying to." Sarah stood up slowly, her joints protesting. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a small wooden box. Inside were papers, loan documents, receipts, and a letter. "This came after I'd already lost the ranch," Sarah said, handing Raina the letter. "I didn't know what to do with it, so I just kept it. Seemed wrong to throw it away." The letter was from a bank clerk in Helena named Robert Finch. It was addressed to Sarah and dated 6 months after she'd lost her property. "Mrs. Mitchell, I am writing to inform you of irregularities I have discovered regarding your loan documents. During a routine audit, I found evidence that the original loan amount was altered after your signature was obtained. The amount you signed for was $200. The amount submitted to the court was $450. I believe this constitutes fraud, but I have been instructed by my superiors not to pursue the matter. I am leaving this position and moving to Denver. I wanted you to know the truth, even if it comes too late to help. I am sorry. Robert Finch." Raina read it 3 times to make sure she understood what she was seeing. "This is proof," she breathed. "Actual proof that Crow altered the documents." "It didn't help me none," Sarah said bitterly. "By the time I got that letter, everything was gone. But it can help us, and everyone else Crow tries to hurt." Raina stood up. "Can I take this? Show it to a lawyer?" "Take it, burn it, I don't care." Sarah's voice cracked. "I just don't want anyone else to go through what I did." Raina rode back to the ranch faster than was safe, the letter clutched in her coat pocket like it might disappear if she didn't hold on to it. When she burst through the cabin door, Gideon was sitting at the table with Henry Blackwood. "I found something," she said, pulling out the letter. "Proof. Real proof." Blackwood read it carefully, his expression shifting from interest to excitement. "This is exactly what we need. A bank employee willing to go on record about altered documents. If we can find this Robert Finch—" "He's in Denver," Raina said. "The letter says so." "Then we need to get him to testify, or at least provide a sworn statement." Blackwood looked at Gideon. "How fast can you get to Denver?" "Not fast enough. That's a week's ride in good weather. We've got—" Gideon stopped, calculating. 5 days left. "Then we use what we have. This letter, combined with the other evidence we've gathered, might be enough to convince a judge to halt the foreclosure." Blackwood started gathering papers. "I'll file the injunction first thing tomorrow morning, but you two need to be prepared for Crow to fight back. Hard." "Let him fight," Raina said. "We're not backing down." That night, neither of them could sleep. They lay in the dark, talking about everything except what would happen if they lost. About plans for spring, about building an addition onto the cabin, about the foal one of the horses would have in a few months. "You're doing it again," Gideon said. "Doing what?" "Planning a future like you know it's going to happen." "Would you rather I plan for failure?" "No, I just—" He turned to face her. "I want you to be ready for the possibility that this doesn't work, that we might lose everything despite fighting as hard as we can. I know that. Do you? Because you're talking about spring like it's certain. Raina was quiet for a moment. When I was alone at the homestead, I stopped planning for the future. Every day was just about surviving that day. I told myself it was practical, realistic, but really, I'd just given up on the idea that things could get better. And now? Now I know that planning for the future isn't about being certain it'll happen. It's about deciding you want it badly enough to fight for it, even if you lose. She found his hand in the darkness. I'd rather plan for a future I might not get than give up on one I still have a chance at. He kissed her then, soft and deep, like he was trying to memorize the moment. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I love you, he said quietly. I know we haven't said it yet. I know this whole thing started as a practical arrangement, but I love you, Raina, and whatever happens next, I need you to know that. Her throat went tight. She'd been so careful not to say those words, so afraid that loving someone again meant giving them the power to destroy her. But lying there in the dark with the man who'd given her a future when she'd thought she had none, she realized fear was just another cage. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since that blizzard when you admitted you were tired of being alone. That was months ago. I know, I was just too scared to say it. And now? Now I'm more scared of losing you without having told you. They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd started as strangers and become something neither of them had planned for, something worth fighting for, something worth risking everything to keep. Outside, the wind picked up. Another storm coming, but inside, wrapped in each other's warmth, they felt ready for whatever came next. The hearing was set for the morning of the 6th day. The entire town seemed to know about it. When Raina and Gideon rode in with Blackwood, Main Street was lined with people watching. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked like they were waiting for a show. The courthouse was packed. Crow sat at the front with two expensive-looking lawyers, confident and relaxed like this was already decided. When he saw Raina, he smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd won this game so many times he didn't even consider the possibility of losing anymore. Judge Harrison took his seat, an older man with a reputation for being fair but not particularly sympathetic to hard luck stories. Blackwood had warned them that Harrison cared more about the law than about feelings. We're here regarding the foreclosure case of Crow versus Vale, Harrison said. Mr. Blackwood, you filed an injunction. Make your case. Blackwood stood. He was good, clear and direct, laying out the evidence piece by piece, the pattern of predatory lending, the altered documents from Sarah Mitchell's case, the suspicious timing of Crow's appearance, the testimony from other victims. Crow's lawyers objected at every opportunity, but Blackwood kept pushing forward. When he presented Sarah Mitchell's letter from the bank clerk, the courtroom went dead silent. Your Honor, this letter proves that Mr. Crow has a documented history of altering loan documents after obtaining signatures. I move that this case be dismissed on the grounds of fraud. Crow's lead lawyer stood up smoothly. Your Honor, this letter is hearsay from a disgruntled former employee. It has no bearing on the current case. The loan documents in question were filed properly and legally. Mr. and Mrs. Vale have failed to make payment. The law is clear. The law is clear when the documents are legitimate, Blackwood shot back. But if these documents were obtained through fraud, alleged fraud, there's no proof of fraud in the current case. Because the proof is being hidden. If the court would subpoena Mr. Crow's records, we have no grounds for a subpoena based on speculation and an old letter about a different case. The argument went back and forth. Raina watched the judge's face, trying to read which way he was leaning. Harrison looked thoughtful, but unmoved, like he was hearing interesting theories but nothing concrete enough to rule on. Finally, Harrison held up his hand for silence. I've heard enough. Mr. Blackwood, while your evidence suggests a troubling pattern, you haven't proven fraud in this specific case. The loan documents appear legitimate and properly filed. Raina's stomach dropped. However, Harrison continued, the letter from Mr. Finch raises serious questions about Mr. Crow's business practices. I'm willing to grant a 30-day extension to allow time for further investigation. If Mr. Blackwood can provide concrete evidence of fraud in the Vale case specifically, we'll revisit this matter. Your Honor, my clients need more than 30 days to... 30 days is what I'm offering. Use it wisely. Harrison banged his gavel. Next case. Outside the courthouse, Crow approached them with that same confident smile. 30 days, he said conversationally. That's generous. The judge must like you. Stay away from us, Gideon said quietly. I'm simply informing you that 30 days won't make a difference. You can't prove fraud because there isn't any. Your husband borrowed money. He died. You married a man with assets. Now those assets are collateral for the debt. It's all perfectly legal. Crow's smile widened. But I'm not unreasonable. I'll make you an offer. Sell me the property for $3,000. That's far more than it's worth. You walk away with cash and no legal troubles. We're not selling, Raina said. Think about it. $3,000 would set you up nicely somewhere else. Somewhere you could start fresh without all these painful memories. I said we're not selling. Such a shame. Because in 30 days, when you found nothing and the foreclosure proceeds, you'll get nothing. The property will be seized to settle the debt. You'll leave with whatever you can carry. Crow tipped his hat. The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, we do this the hard way. He walked away, his expensive boots clicking on the wooden sidewalk. I want to shoot him, Raina said through clenched teeth. Get in line, Blackwood muttered. But he's right about one thing. We have 30 days to find proof. Real, concrete, undeniable proof. Or you lose everything. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the small victory of the extension overshadowed by the enormity of what they still had to accomplish. 30 days sounded like a lot, until you realized it wasn't nearly enough time to track down a bank clerk in Denver and build a case strong enough to take down a man who'd been running this scheme for years. That night, Margaret showed up with news. Robert Finch, she said without preamble. The bank clerk who wrote that letter to Sarah Mitchell. What about him? Raina asked. He's dead. Died 2 years ago in Denver. Carriage accident. The words hit like a physical blow. Their best witness was gone. Their strongest evidence just became circumstantial. Are you sure? Gideon asked. Positive. I telegraphed a friend in Denver. She sent back confirmation this afternoon. Margaret's face was grim. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. After she left, Raina and Gideon sat at the table staring at each other. We're running out of options, she said. We still have 30 days. To do what? Everyone who could testify against Crow is either dead or too scared to come forward. The documents look legitimate. Even if they're not, we can't prove it. So what do you want to do? Give up? No. I want to burn Crow's office to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. She dropped her head into her hands. But that's not helpful. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What if we're looking at this wrong? What do you mean? We're trying to prove the documents are fake. But what if instead we prove Crow is a fraud? Show the pattern so clearly that the judge has no choice but to investigate him. How do we do that? We find every person he's ever cheated. We get them all in one room. We make them tell their stories, not just to a judge, but to everyone. Make it so public that Crow can't hide anymore. Raina stopped. That's actually not a terrible idea, but it would take weeks to find everyone and convince them to come forward. Then we work fast. 6. They worked faster than fast. They worked like they were running out of time because they were. Raina spent days riding to every property Crow had touched, talking to people who'd lost everything, listening to stories that broke her heart over and over. Some people slammed doors in her face. Others wept. But slowly, painfully, she started building a list. Gideon and Blackwood worked on the legal angle, finding loopholes and technicalities that might buy them more time. They filed motions, requested documents, made themselves such a nuisance that Crow's lawyers started showing up just to try to shut them down. On day 15, Crow made good on his threat. Raina was alone at the ranch when 6 men rode up. Not the young troublemaker from before. These were older, harder, the kind of men who hurt people for money and didn't lose sleep over it. The leader dismounted and walked right up to the porch like he owned it. Mrs. Vale, Mr. Crow sent us to make sure you understand the situation. Raina stepped out with the rifle. I understand it fine. You're trespassing. Leave. Mr. Crow is offering you one final chance to sell, $5,000. That's more than generous. Tell Crow what I told him before. We're not selling. Ma'am, I don't think you appreciate... I appreciate that you're still standing on my property after I told you to leave. That's 3 seconds away from becoming a problem for you. The man studied her, trying to decide if she'd actually shoot. Raina made sure he could see her finger on the trigger. made sure her hands weren't shaking even though her heart was hammering. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "Probably, but it's my mistake to make." They left, but she knew they'd be back. Crow was escalating, getting desperate. That meant either they were close to winning or about to lose everything. She wasn't sure which. Gideon came home that evening to find her sitting on the porch with the rifle across her lap and a cold determination in her eyes. "They came back," she said. "Who?" "Crow's men. Offered 5,000 this time." "You said no." "Of course I said no." She looked up at him. "But Gideon, they're not going to stop. They're going to keep pushing until someone gets hurt." "I know. So what do we do?" "We finish this. Tomorrow. We're calling a town meeting. Everyone Crow has ever cheated, everyone who's willing to speak up, everyone who's been too scared until now. We put it all out in the open. And if people don't show up, then we tried." He sat down beside her. "But I think they will. I think people are tired of being scared. They're just waiting for someone to stand up first." The meeting was held in the church basement because it was the only place big enough. Raina helped Margaret set up chairs while Gideon and Blackwood went over the plan one more time. They had 17 people confirmed to speak, 17 stories of how Crow had destroyed lives. By 7 o'clock, the room was packed. Not just the people they'd contacted, but half the town. Word had spread. People wanted to see if this would actually happen, or if Crow would shut it down before it started. Crow himself showed up 20 minutes late, walking in with his lawyers like he was attending a social event. He sat in the back with that same confident smile, not even bothering to look concerned. Blackwood stood at the front. "Thank you all for coming. We're here tonight because Silas Crow has built a business on the backs of desperate people. He targets widows and struggling families with loans that look like salvation but are actually traps. He alters documents. He uses legal technicalities to steal property. And he's gotten away with it because victims have been too ashamed or too scared to speak up." "This is slander," one of Crow's lawyers called out. "It's truth," Blackwood shot back. "And tonight, you're going to hear it from people who lived through it." One by one, people stood and told their stories. Sarah Mitchell talked about losing her ranch and finding out years later that the loan amount had been changed. A man named Jacob Torres described watching his family's cattle operation get seized over a debt he swore he'd never agreed to. A young woman named Emma Price talked about her father's suicide after Crow took everything they had. The stories kept coming, each one different in the details, but identical in the pattern. Crow would appear at the worst possible moment with the perfect solution. The paperwork would be complicated, but he'd explain it away with charm and authority. By the time people realized what they'd signed, it was too late. Through it all, Crow sat in the back looking bored, like he'd heard this all before and wasn't impressed. When it was Raina's turn to speak, she stood up with her hands shaking. "My first husband, Thomas Holloway, signed loan papers with Mr. Crow 3 years ago. Thomas died before he could pay it back. Mr. Crow waited until I remarried to come after the debt, knowing my new husband had assets to seize. What Thomas borrowed was $400. What Crow claims we owe is $600. The interest rate is barely legal. The repayment terms are designed to fail, and the contract specifically states that the debt transfers to future spouses, which is unusual and suspicious." She pulled out the letter from Robert Finch. "This is a letter from a bank clerk who documented that Crow altered loan amounts on other cases. The clerk is dead now. Convenient accident, like several other people who've tried to expose Mr. Crow. Maybe that's coincidence, or maybe it's a pattern." "You have no proof of wrongdoing," Crow said lazily from the back. "Just speculation from bitter people who can't accept their own failures." "Is that what Sarah Mitchell is?" Raina shot back. "A failure? She ran a successful ranch for 30 years until you showed up. Is Jacob Torres a failure? His family's been ranching for 3 generations. What about Emma Price's father? He built a thriving business from nothing. The only failure here is a system that lets men like you destroy lives legally." The room erupted. People shouting agreement, others calling for Crow to be arrested. Someone threw something that missed Crow but hit his lawyer. Judge Harrison stood up from where he'd been sitting quietly in the corner. The room went silent. "Mr. Crow," Harrison said, "I attended tonight as a private citizen, but what I've heard is deeply troubling. I'm ordering a full investigation into your business practices. Until that investigation is complete, all pending foreclosures are suspended." Your Honor, you can't. I can, and I am. This court has a responsibility to ensure justice, not enable theft. Harrison looked around the room. Anyone who believes they've been defrauded by Mr. Crow should file a formal complaint. I'll review each case personally. Crow's confident smile finally cracked. He stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is a witch hunt. These people are lying. Then you'll have an opportunity to prove that in court. Until then, you're not to contact any of the people in this room or their properties. Understood? Crow didn't answer. He just turned and walked out, his lawyers scrambling to follow. The room exploded into cheers and applause. People rushed toward Raina and Gideon, thanking them, crying, hugging them like they'd just won a war. Maybe they had. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, Judge Harrison and a territorial marshal dug through every case Crow had ever filed. They found altered documents, forged signatures, and a pattern of predatory lending that stretched across 5 territories. Robert Finch's accident turned out to be not so accidental when they found a witness who'd seen Crow's men near the scene. 2 other suspicious deaths were reopened for investigation. In April, just as the snow was melting and the first green shoots were appearing, Crow was arrested. The charges included fraud, forgery, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. His assets were frozen. His properties were seized. Every foreclosure he'd ever filed was reviewed. Thomas's loan was officially declared fraudulent. The debt was erased. The threat to the ranch disappeared like morning frost under sunshine. Raina and Gideon stood on their porch watching the spring arrive and feeling like they could finally breathe. "We did it," she said. "We did. I still can't believe it worked." "It worked because you refused to quit." Gideon pulled her close. "Most people would have given up or run away. You stood and fought." "We stood and fought." "Yeah, we did." They were quiet for a moment, watching the mountains turn purple and gold in the sunset. The same mountains that had nearly killed Raina 2 years ago. The same wilderness that had shaped them both into people hard enough to survive and stubborn enough to win. "I'm pregnant," Raina said quietly. Gideon went very still. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure. I wasn't going to say anything until we knew about Crow. Didn't want to jinx it." "How long?" "Maybe 2 months. There'll be a baby before next winter." He turned to face her, and his expression was something she'd never seen before. Joy mixed with terror, mixed with wonder. "We're having a baby." "Yeah, we are." She touched his face. "You're going to be a father." "I don't know how to be a father." "Good thing you've got months to figure it out." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, like he was trying to pour every feeling he didn't have words for into the gesture. When they broke apart, he rested his hand on her stomach where nothing was visible yet, but everything was changing. "I love you," he said. "Both of you. We love you too." That night they lay in bed talking about names and nurseries and whether the baby would have his size or her stubbornness, talking about a future that was finally certain, finally safe. The woman who'd almost died alone in a freezing homestead was gone. So was the man who'd built an empire in the wilderness with no one to share it. They'd both become something new, something neither of them had planned but both of them needed. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like breathing. The valley that had almost become their grave had become their home instead. And in the darkness, 2 people who'd survived separately learned what it meant to thrive together. Sometimes survival isn't about being strong enough to make it alone. Sometimes it's about being brave enough to trust someone else to stand beside you when everything falls apart. About building something together that's stronger than anything either of you could have built alone. About understanding that the future isn't something that happens to you. It's something you fight for, one stubborn day at a time, beside someone who refuses to let you quit. And in the end, that makes all the difference. The baby came in October during the first snowfall. Margaret served as midwife, bossy and efficient, while Gideon paced outside like a caged bear until Margaret finally told him to come inside and be useful. "It's a girl," Margaret announced as the baby's first cry filled the cabin. "Healthy lungs on this one." Gideon held his daughter with hands that had broken rocks and tamed horses, cradling her like she was made of glass. The fierce mountain man everyone feared looked down at the tiny person in his arms, and his eyes went wet. "She's perfect," he whispered. She's wrinkled and covered in fluid, Margaret said practically. But give her a few days. They named her Julia, after Raina's mother. Julia Vale, born in a storm on a mountain ranch her parents had fought tooth and nail to keep. She'd grow up hearing the story of how her mother refused to break and her father refused to quit, how they'd stood against men who thought power meant they could take whatever they wanted. She'd grow up knowing that strength wasn't about surviving alone. It was about finding people worth fighting beside, worth building futures with, worth trusting when everything seemed impossible. 2 years later, there'd be a boy named Thomas. Another 2 years after that, a second girl named Margaret after the woman who'd never stopped showing up with casseroles and stubbornness and friendship. The ranch would thrive. The valley would become known as Vale Valley, named after the family that had made it a home. Other families would settle nearby, drawn by stories of the couple who'd stood up to corruption and won. But on that October night, with snow falling outside and a newborn daughter sleeping in her arms, Raina thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Bleeding hands and empty barns and wolves at the door. Thought about the moment she'd accepted Gideon's proposal out of desperation and exhaustion and stubbornness. She'd married him to survive. She'd stayed with him because she'd fallen in love. And she'd fought beside him because she'd finally understood what Thomas had never taught her. That partnership wasn't about one person protecting another. It was about two people making each other stronger. Gideon came to sit beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders while they both watched their daughter sleep. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For saying yes when I asked. For not giving up when things got hard. For fighting beside me instead of letting me fight alone." He kissed her temple. "For giving me a family worth everything. Thank you for asking. For seeing me when everyone else just saw a woman who couldn't quit." She leaned into him, for building something big enough for both of us. Outside, the wind howled and the snow piled higher. Inside, a fire crackled and a baby dreamed, and two people who'd survived the worst sat together in the warmth. The widow who'd refused to break had become a wife who refused to quit. The lonely mountain man had become a father who'd burned down the world for his family. And together, they'd built something no storm could destroy. Not because they were perfect, not because everything had been easy, but because when the worst came, they'd faced it together. And that had made all the difference.
Why are we going this route? So that took a little bit of time to get over. I still have to unfortunately actively not wear a mask at the moment. But I don't go out that often, and I tend to do a quarantine at home, and I get my yearly vaccinations, of course. Um, would arguably like to get them more often, but unfortunately, that is a case of the insurance. Talking to a therapist was too much for me to get it. Oh, that's valid. That's valid, Fox. That's really valid. Completely understand. And they don't make the process easy, and it depends on what your gender expression is as well. Because the DSM-5 is based off of cis like white cis boys experience in life um versus anyone else who's not. And I know that that's why I got a late diagnosis myself. And I mean, it's fortunate that I'm a processor by talking. So in terms of getting the help, I was able to use that as an as a way to help the process. So I wasn't completely feeling drained, but it definitely was a draining process. I'm not going to lie. It was 3 months of assessing my life, like literally giving my life story. Um, having sessions with my mom, not parents, my mom and my grandparents. And then the way that they did like the diagnosis at the time it was like 3 months of talk therapy with a therapist, and then she had conversations with my family with like the people who, I was the closest to, my grandparents and my mom who raised me. My mom was really young when she had me, so it was she and my